Welcome along to the Technology Whisperers, Season 3, Episode 6, with me, Alistair Ross. Unfortunately, Sean can't be with us today. He's got super busy, and in fact, he's got a really interesting update to tell all of you at some point really soon. But all I can say is that watch this space. It's about the most latest and greatest stuff here in New Zealand. So I'm really stoked for Sean. So he'll come back with a bit of an announcement himself. However, I thought this week's podcast, I thought I'd go ahead with it in any case and just make it a really short and sharp one. I just wanted to focus in on a bit of an announcement which came out today or yesterday, I think it was, from MediSecure. Now, MediSecure are a company kind of like, they're an Australian equivalent, they're an Australian company, and they're kind of like Manage My Health. So if you're not familiar, Manage My Health is an app where you can get prescriptions online, repeat prescriptions, and get them sent to your pharmacy and stuff like that. Unfortunately, their website today looks like this. The irony of the fact that it says eScript sent, secure and safe has not been lost on many of us, but effectively the ABC's news confirms what everybody was hoping was not the case. Not only is the company MediSecure the wrong end of a cyber event or a cyber attack, they're also gone into administration just weeks after its very large cyber attack. So if you don't know about the story, basically it was a large scale ransomware attack. They had much of their data compromised, which included personal identifiable information. Now, the extent of what was actually stolen has not yet been made public, and I'm assuming that they're probably at the point now of sharing what they do know with the Australian government. But unfortunately, during all of this process, and I think if we go through to here, the 16th of May is where MediSecure first processed this information up online and said, hey, by the way, we've got something really big to share. This is really bad. And then obviously we went to 31st of May where they were talking about trying to get a bailout from the from the Australian government. And they wanted to clarify that their bailout was not to meet any other financial expectations. It was purely about the financial costs of dealing with this cyber event. In any case, the Australian government said, no, you're not getting any bailouts from us. That's never happened in Australian history, where the government, the taxpayer, effectively bails out corporations as a result of a cyber attack. So very interesting, both politically and also, sadly, with regards to the cyber story and the millions of people's information, this private information, which has been breached there. And I guess, we could probably wax lyrical about this, but unfortunately, the reality is we don't fully know what the reason for all of this is. We don't know what has happened in terms of like how big the extent of the ransomware breach is, and we don't know where it's been shared, other than to say it's on the dark net somewhere. That has been proven, I believe. And so if we go in here, we can see that patient data relating to scripts and personal information of healthcare providers is now on the dark web. So that source hasn't been verified, at least as far as I'm aware. But that information is going to ABC News, so obviously it must be true, right? So I think, look, the main thing that I would say about all of this is that it just goes to show that no organization is infallible. And if we've had Medibank, which was an Australian insurer, which was a massive Australian insurer. I think there was something like 9.7 million records released onto the darknet in a similar sort of ransomware attack. That was Australia's biggest in December 2022. That was the biggest ransomware attack that had ever happened. And the fact is that a lot of this is happening in Australia, and because of the way that the Privacy Commissioner there works and the way that the legislation in the country now works, is that a lot of this is having to be released into the public domain. People are having to know about this. It's not a matter of, oh, we could sweep this under the rug. It's obviously, if the events are this big, there's no way of getting them swept under the rug. But here in New Zealand, at the moment, the privacy legislation is is much more toothless. The maximum fine, for example, is $10,000, whereas up to $52 million Australian in Australia. So I think there's a huge, big difference there in terms of a financial recourse, but also in terms of our requirements here in this country to report a data breach or to report a privacy aspect in general. So that's one thing that I know that Michael Webster, the new privacy commissioner here in New Zealand, has really thought about. Now, despite the Privacy Act only being updated last to the version 2.0 in 2020, I think Michael Webster has already stated that he is reviewing this and will probably be looking to change that, both the fine but also the requirements of disclosure. So just watch this space, as I would say, to anybody who has information that they collect on a PII basis. The legislation around the Privacy Act in New Zealand is very likely to change. How soon will that be? I don't know. But I think, again, the thing about all of this is, and we don't know the answer, but are these organizations getting back to basics? Because it seems to be happening more and more and more. Now, yes, one could argue the reason that these things are happening more and more and more is because there are more and more attacks and there's more and more easy ways to do it. And in fact, if we look at AI, we're having AI adversaries going off just fully automated processes which just spray a whole bunch of phishing campaigns across the world to random people, and in the hope that somebody will click one of these phishing campaigns. And of course, the cost to that is no more than the cost of running a server for a few hours to run these campaigns. So what we're getting at here is that, yes, whilst there is a heightened and continually heightened deployment of all of these security exploitations, it's also a case of, are we doing the right things and the basic things in terms of security? There's a framework called the NIST framework, which I like to use because it always talks about the main tenets of security. And if we think about nothing else other than those main tenets, and so if every day you walk into the office and you just think about those 5 main framework items, as in somebody who's got a role in privacy or security, or just the overall governance of privacy or security in your organization. So that could be a chief information security officer, could be a CIO, but is also relatively important to all of the members of a board and the executive, because you all have a responsibility on the privacy and security of the information that you hold. And so those 5 items are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In fact, I'll put it up here on the display here so you can see what I'm talking about. So the NIST framework basically looks like this. It's been updated very recently in February of 2024 with this yellow circle around the middle, basically meaning that the governance of all of these aspects is throughout. There are a whole number of attributes which go with govern, but the original NIST 1.1 or NIST 1 framework was these 5 items around there. So even if you don't look at the govern part of it and just say, oh, I'm a small or a medium business, this is too much for me, really just think about what all these things mean to your organization. So if you're thinking about these and actually doing something about these every single week at least, then you're probably doing the right thing. Whether MediSecure were doing that, who knows, right? So what do these things actually mean? Well, identify means to identify all of your assets. And a lot of people say to me, oh, look, I've got assets. I've got a laptop. I've got a desktop. I've got a server. I've got a bunch of things there. And I put that on an asset register. That's not quite what I'm talking about. to identify your assets, you must also talk about people and process and policy, as well as obviously all of the technology things, software and hardware and cloud. And then there's also third parties as well. Think about your supply chain. If you're entrusting your information with a third party company down the line, is that third party actually reputable, and have they got the appropriate privacy rights and regulations and policies that are compatible with your organization? And then think about fourth parties as well. It might be the case that an organization that you deal with require the uses or services, of another organization down the line. Well, then they come into the question too, as all part of that supply chain. So once you've done identifying all of those, I like to make sure that we combine those with risk. So I don't just have an asset register and a risk register. I actually like to combine those two. And what I do with the asset and the risk register is I put in, at the very minimum, a CIA triad value. What's the CIA triad value? It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So a lot of people like to get pretty big and pretty impressive with their risk registers and put the 5x5, which is a matrix of likelihood versus risk in all of their assets that they have in the risk register. And that's really cool. If you can do that, that's wonderful. It's kind of like the nirvana situation. However, in reality, getting to that state of having, that 5x5 matrix across every single asset in your organization and every single risk in your organization can be quite a taxing job. So maybe there's a way to quickly help you get to an identification of those risks. And that's by using the CIA value I talked about. So confidentiality, let's just say that we're talking about the invoicing folder on your finance server, right? Or the finance server in its entirety, right? Something like that, right? So let's just take that, the finance server in its entirety, all the files that are dealing with the finance server. So let's think about confidentiality first. Is the confidentiality of that server important? Yes, somewhat, or no? And of course, if your answer is yes, then it gets a high score. It gets, let's say 3, so 1, 2, or 3, right, for each answer. So let's say it gets a 3 because we care about the confidentiality of our finance stuff, right? And then next along was integrity. And basically, if you can imagine, the integrity is something like, if it was the information that was stored in this share was no longer correct, what would that mean to your organization? So let's take that into a literal example. For example, let's just say that there were a bunch of spreadsheets and all of the invoices on those spreadsheets or all of the financial transactions had a 0 shifted left, or a 0 shifted right, or basically the values became corrupted. The values that were supposed to be there became corrupted in some way. So is that a big deal? And obviously, again, that is a big deal when we're talking about our financial records. So it would be a score of 3 because it is a big deal. And then finally, availability. That's based on whether the information that we have, if it is there tomorrow, it was gone tomorrow, basically saying, here, the information here is right there, it's present now, but tomorrow the information is gone. Would that be a big deal to you? And again, if the answer is yes, then that's a 3. And so if now with this finance example I've given you, we've scored 3 for yes, it is confidential. Yes, the integrity matters. And yes, the availability matters. So 3, 6, 9, we've got a score of 9. And so very quickly, we've been able to make that a statement about the risk value of that particular asset. So that's all going to identify. So now that we know the assets and the appropriate risk values with those assets, if we have done absolutely nothing else other than identifying those risks and assets, that would be a huge help to being able to protect our assets. So that's what the next phase of this is all about. It's basically saying, what mechanisms do we have in place to be able to protect those assets? And those assets could be things like data leakage or data loss, right? It could be how we protect them using a firewall or backup solutions or all those sorts of things. There's plenty of those things in there. But basically, every day, if you're having a positive thought about how you deal with protecting all of those assets which you have identified, that's a great thing to be doing. A lot of people, they forget to do this identify part, or they sometimes forget to do some of the protect part. And then because you haven't identified and because you might not have adequately protected, you can start to see the chain slipping away. And by the time you get to detect, that's the process of detecting when a cyber incident actually happens. If you haven't gone down the process of identifying things, and if you haven't gone down the process of putting protective technologies and solutions and policies in place, then you can't possibly detect all of the potential risks and events coming your way. And then basically the last two is really about responding and recovering. So response is basically saying, hey, I have got this security incident. It's happening right now in real time. How do I then respond to it? What do I do? What are the things that I need to do to make this right? And of course, those things could be things like recovering from a backup, or other disaster recovery approach is being invoked. Also talking about the policies and processes that you need to follow, but also maybe the communications plan about who needs to be informed. Is it internal stakeholders only? Is it external stakeholders? Is it the press? Is it NCSC and CERT 0800 CERT NZ, for example? All these sorts of people, and insurers, all sorts of questions like that. Who is going to be contacted in a response plan? And then the final part of this puzzle is how we actually recover. So we've detected an event over here, then we go and we deal with the response. But how do we actually go about recovering? All right. So we know we've got something on the go here. What is the process of recovery? And the recovery could be down into digital forensics. It could be so many things to basically make sure you get back. But like I said, in the respond area, you might have fired up your backups, and this is the time when you recover your backups and say, right, okay, we've got new systems now from a known good backup. It's very important, by the way, to have tested your backups so that you can validate that you have known good backups. But there's obviously a point where you might have infiltrated systems, and that has gone on for a few days or a few weeks. And what's the break point at which you say, actually, the stuff that I've recovered now from a backup, which is known good, is 6 months old. Is that actually any use now? So you have to put the whole process into question and say, well, how can we actually make sure our business is going back to a known good state? And that comes into updating your business continuity plan, your disaster recovery plan, but most importantly, I believe, is the security incident response plan. And that's exactly what you should do in the event of a cybersecurity incident. And all of those things kind of play in together. So look, that's a very, very brief introduction to what I think that we're kind of sorely missing in the world of cybersecurity basics. There are a lot of organizations, MediSecure here, Medibank. We've had just so many of them in recent history, and it seems like some of them are really just dropping the ball and very, very simple stuff. I think it was Optus that we had the cybersecurity breach in 2023, where it was a simple API exposure. There was no username or password put on the API. And obviously that was an accident. It wasn't a hack, though. It wasn't really a hacker. It was just somebody who thought, oh, what happens if I put a number 1 against this and then a number 2? And all of a sudden, they saw the customer information for every single customer that they had. And so they went from a situation of building a little script that then dropped all of the information that they could get out of an API, and then that was it for Optus. So very bad, very expensive data breach. And if they do this process of identifying all of their assets and continually identifying their assets as they change and putting them on a register somewhere, and then how are you protecting those assets? And always asking the question about how you're protecting them. So then you can detect, because that particular issue went undetected for a very, very long time, and that's not atypical. So quite interesting to see that this is still happening, still growing. The attacks are always coming our way. So really, really, that's sort of my key takeaway from today. Keep doing the basics, keep doing them well. And if you've got any questions, love to hear from you in the questions or the comments below. And that's about it for this particular Technology Whisperers. Hope you've enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.